Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Uh, Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm so glad that you're here for this program, which I think is it's one of my favorites because it covers a lot of well, literally and figuratively covers a lot of ground and ties together a lot of parts of what happened in town and sort of how they brought the town's development together. I am going to share my screen now so I can start with the membership pitch. We love doing these programs. We do as many of them as we can. We don't charge admission for them because we'd like as many people as possible to join us. On the other hand, we are a membership run organization. We do have costs. So if you can, we'd be very grateful if you joined. The address is needhamhistory.org/membership. And also we have other events coming up on our calendar. We keep our calendar updated. So if you're interested in what we have coming, the link is needhamhistory.org/calendar-events. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about a Needham streetcar journey from Farmland to Suburb. Right now, everybody is muted. We're going to ask everybody to stay mute during the program. And at the end, I will open up the Brady Bunch window again. So if anybody has any questions or comments, we could have a discussion then. So let's get started. The streetcar suburb is defined most closely as a town that grew up in the 19th century to take advantage of a new trolley line, though by extension, it has come to mean any residential development whose growth is tied to access to public transportation. The classic local example is Belmont, which separated from Cambridge, Watertown, and Arlington in 1859 after the arrival of the railroad and blossomed into a residential suburb when the trolley came through. A more recent example of this effect is the transformation of Davis Square in Somerville after the Red Line extension in the 1980s and the Commonwealth's smart growth agenda. Remember those days? We love to complain about transportation. Under normal circumstances, the T has a terrible on-time record. Route 128 and, God forbid, Needham Street are like parking lots for most of the day. And there are practically no buses anymore. So most of us stick to our cars, which have become rolling offices and entertainment centers to go wherever and wherever we need to. We are fortunate in this way, or perhaps wasteful, or maybe spoiled. But we tend to forget in our freewheeling ways that the widespread availability of the car is really a later 20th century phenomenon. Needham is an old town, 309 and a half years to be precise. So it's not originally built around cars, as any drive down South Street or Forest Street makes abundantly clear. However, that does not mean that Needham in 1711 was oblivious to the virtues of good transportation. In fact, I would argue that the watersheds in Needham's development all centered around transportation. This is not unique. Old cities were built on rivers or harbors. Chicago and Kansas City were railroad hubs. But the transportation system that we so love to hate has played an outsized role in the creation of the town we know. We will get to streetcars and suburbs, but we will get there along a more winding path. Sorry. First, it was the coach roads. Needham was set up for agriculture, surely. The big attraction was the good cattle grazing along the Charles River and the broad meadows. But the placement of the town, by which I mean the location of the church, the school, and the meeting space, was strategic. The section of Central Avenue between Nahoyden Street and Great Plain Avenue may be nowhere important to us, but in the 18th century, it was downtown Needham. Downtown Needham was never a metropolis, but the center had all the necessities: the church, the parson's house, and the school. And in this excellent little drawing, where's my, I don't have my cursor. Well, you can see the church there, the parson's house next to the tree. The school is a little red one, and all the way down on the bottom right-hand corner is the tavern. Later on, there was a meeting hall right next to that little red school. The cemetery is just to the east of the church in Nahoyden Street, and the tavern, as I pointed out, was just to the south at the main crossroads. Great Plain and Central Avenues were the main east-west and north-south routes through the town. They led to the larger towns of Boston, Dedham, Worcester, as well as towns in the interior. The lovely white house at the northwest corner of Great Plain and Central bears a sign identifying it as the Macintosh Tavern site. The tavern itself, both its commerce and its building, are long gone. The sign, however, reminds us that this corner was once the center of Needham's life. The tavern was established sometime after 1800 by Major Ebenezer Macintosh. As a public house and inn, the tavern was located at the intersection of the coach roads to accommodate travelers. Inns were the only places where travelers could find a meal and a bed along the way, so the inns and coaches often worked together. Macintosh's tavern, like any good pub, was also the town's social and commercial gathering space. Travelers brought the latest information, so the tavern was a hub of local news and gossip. Coaches carried the mail and the freight, so the tavern was crucial for commerce. Since it was on the good roads, it had a large hall, so it was also a meeting place for town activities, public meetings, dances, sales, and lectures. In the later 1700s, it became increasingly common for town meeting to adjourn early in the day and to resume the meeting later in the tavern. And it has been said, Needham historian George Kuhn Clark observed, that the change was not made in the interest of good government. The prominence of the tavern in local life was not without its problems. In 1785, town meeting admonished the selectmen and constables to be more diligent in enforcing the laws, respecting those persons that spend their time and interest unnecessarily in taverns. Again, in 1791, the constables were urged to discourage idlers and tavern haunters. Also in 1829, and again in 1837. But it was not the constables that eventually did the tavern in, nor even the rise of temperance. It was the railroad. In the 1830s, a rail line was built through West Needham, connecting Boston to Worcester. And in this map, it's the, there's my cursor. Okay, it's this one right here. That's the Worcester line. This was ultimately the cause of Wellesley, which is related to this topic, but we will not dwell on it here. In 1853, a second line from Boston to Woonsocket, and that's this one here, was built through Needham, in part to facilitate the transport of gravel from Needham to fill the Back Bay. The route was along what now survives as the Green Line's Riverside Track, but in those days extended from Newton Highlands all along the back of Needham Street through Needham Heights and into Needham Center. Look at the route. The intention was to run the train right through the center of town. Now, the center of town, which is a little hard to see on this map, is right there. That's Newhoyden and Central. Here's North Hill. And you can see it's headed right in that direction. However, the parish and others who owned land in the center denied the right of way, and the path veered south through the mostly empty pasture land of the Great Plain. And you can see here, it's headed right to the center, makes this big bend to the south into the Great Plain. Like the coaches, the rail brought access to transportation, customers, commodities, and news, but it did this faster and cheaper, and with a much greater capacity to move freight and supplies. The coach traveled at about 5 miles per hour when the roads were good. It could carry only a limited number of people and packages, both because of space and because every pound of weight slowed the horses. The iron horse didn't care. It could pull a row of freight cars and passenger cars and still maintain speeds of 20 to 30 miles an hour. With a dedicated line, it did not have to compete with other road traffic as the coaches did. If you figure the trip to Boston at about 15 miles, that could cut down your trip from about 3 to 4 hours to about 1. Suddenly, the trip to Boston became convenient, something you could even do daily. You could even leave Boston and live in the country. And this was no small thing. Boston in the 1850s was crowded and filthy. Constrained by its geography, the land was scarce and conditions were increasingly crowded, even if you were wealthy. Ill-advised attempts to create mill ponds restricted water flow around the peninsula, resulting in what was effectively a giant open sewer. So if you look at this is from the top of Beacon Hill, there's the Long Causeway. This is what will become the Back Bay. It was the mill pond. It was intended to be cleaned out by the tides. That in fact did not work. And it literally just became a sewer pit. The potato famine in Ireland at the same time caused a huge increase in immigration, doubling the city's population in only 20 years. The solution was to fill the mill pond, the Back Bay, and transform it into residential land. The gravel for this gigantic undertaking came from Needham and was transported along the rail line. And this was not only the largest public works project of its day, but I think it stood as the largest public works project until the Big Dig. So that gives you some idea of the scale of this operation. Isn't that a beautiful picture? The creation of the Back Bay was a direct attempt to build high-end residential neighborhoods and prevent the wealthier residents from taking these convenient trains and living in places like Needham. But many left anyway. As a result, just as the railroad replaced the coach network, the Great Plain replaced the old center. Once the railroad was built, businesses and homes were increasingly drawn away from the old center on Nahoyden Street and toward the convenience and activity of the train station. New residents were not tied to farmland on South Street, and merchants could broaden their markets by shipping their goods out and bringing a more varied range of goods. This is a view of the Great Plain. This is the one and only commercial building in the new Needham downtown. It was it's called Village Hall. It was the meeting hall on the second floor, the post office, general store, and you can see there's the train crossing sign. The tracks are right here in the foreground, and here's the train platform. So it's built right next to the train. It was built in, 1856, I think. So right after the train came, that became the first public building in the new downtown. For a quick perspective on the way that the railroad changed Needham, take a walk along Nahoyden Street from Central Avenue to Great Plain Avenue, from the old center to the new. Toward the Nahoyden end, the oldest houses are a style generically known as the 5-bay center entry colonial. You can see 5 windows across the top, door in the middle. They don't vary very much. With few exceptions, nearly all of the surviving 18th and 19th century houses in Needham are of this type, a testament to the stability, if not the staticness, of the town's population. You build a house in the way you learned from your father, which he learned from his father, etc., all the way back to the 1700s. Then at the top of Nahoyden, you get to this, the George Washburn House, Needham's earliest and I think finest Italianate Victorian, which was built in 1855, only 2 years after the train. George Washburn was a banker from Boston who decided he could work in Boston but live in Needham. Then take a map and follow all the roads that radiate out from Center Station. Some of the most beautiful Victorians in Needham cluster along the approaches to Center Station, Maple Street, Linden Street, Great Plain, a testament to the importance of the trains to both residential growth and the influx of new ideas. This is also the first time in Needham that you see real estate speculation and built neighborhoods, opposed to houses being built when needed. The Great Plain was divided up into house lots almost immediately. Local roads like Webster, Manning, and Highland were extended across town. Warren Street, an 18th century road which ran from High Rock to Great Plain, was extended through town to Kingsbury Street. And by 1875, Needham Center is a place. And if any of you are familiar with the Kaufman's house, there it is. That's when it was first built. It's a fairly dense neighborhood, but as you can see, right now it's kind of the open spaces. The last vestiges of the coach network were gone, and the last public building in the old center, the First Parish Church, was lifted up onto rollers in 1878 and dragged to its current location at the corner of Great Plain and Dedham. The other big residential change in Needham was in the Heights. For 150 years, the Heights economy was tied to small mill operations around the upper and lower falls and farming along the slopes. The gravel digging brought an influx of workers, many immigrants, but the lasting impact came from the industrialization of the knitting industry starting in the 1860s. An influx of knitters from the English Midlands, including, but not limited to William Carter, transformed the local economy. Although many of these enterprises were small, there were a number of large mills that provided permanent work and good wages. The mills grew up around Heights Station, and so did the neighborhoods, as both mill workers and mill owners built their homes to be close to their work. Now, and this is, it said Needham Heights in 1887. This is the Carter factory. It's now the, what was Avery? It's now going to be the new healthcare facility. This was Mosley's factory. Brookline Rug is down here someplace. That was a mill as well. But you could see all these long, Thorpe Mill is right here. All these long aisle buildings are knitting mills. Here's another facility as well. So there were probably eight or 10 large mill facilities in Needham Heights, and numerous smaller and household scale operations. The electric railroad has penetrated into the somewhat sleepy burg of Needham, and the people of that place are enthusiastic over the prospective benefits which are to result from the coming of the road. It is not unlikely that Needham and the other towns along the route will become among the most attractive suburban districts about Boston. Its drawback of inaccessibility is now largely overcome. The Boston Record, 1897. The electric streetcar, the trolley, came to Needham on May 12, 1897 in a burst of celebration. The trolley provided a relatively easy and inexpensive means of getting over very great distances. The steam train provided service to Boston for 30 to 50 cents. The trolley covered the distance in the same amount of time and cost only a dime. The trolley traveled over a network of local towns. You could get to all sorts of places that the train, which only ran toward Boston, did not reach. Newton, Natick, Felchville, Roberts Crossing. Points if anybody knows where those are. And once you got to these towns, you could keep going because the streetcar was a network. It could take you much farther for not much more money, to Worcester, to Lowell, and even if you had the time, to New York. A trip on the electric cars from Boston to New York can now be made in 49 hours at a cost of $2.30. Most Needham people, however, will continue to ride to Boston in 1 hour and a half for 10 cents. The Needham Chronicle, 1899. And you can see Needham is here. From Needham, you can go to Wellesley, and all these little hash marks indicate that these are hubs, and there are other routes leading off. So from Wellesley, you can go out to Worcester. From Worcester, you can go to points west, or if you wanted to go north, Lexington up to Lowell, south to New York. So with enough patience and enough dimes, you can get pretty far on the street trolley. Needham had 4 streetcar lines, each an independent company, and each leaving from the intersection of Great Plain and Chestnut and Chapel Streets. Now, basically one in each of the cardinal directions. The Needham-Newton Street Railway was the most successful, running north up Highland Avenue to Newton via Upper Falls. From Newton, you can continue eastward to Boston or north to Lowell. So here's the track, there's the trolley car, and this sign is that's essentially the trolley stop. It tells you which routes, which cars to pick up to go to the various places that this route covers. The Natick and Constituent Street Railway ran west up Great Plain Avenue to Wellesley Center, where you could change for a trolley to Natick, Framingham, or even Worcester. The Needham and Boston Street Railway traveled up Harris Avenue to Roslindale in Boston. It was poorly constructed, slow, uncomfortable, and the line was often shut down by snow. The extension of rapid train service from Needham Junction in 1906 reduced the ridership considerably, despite the train's higher cost. The 4th line, the Needham Street Railway, ran up Chestnut Street to Dover, Natick, and Framingham. This line was never well used and closed after only 3 years. And this picture has both of them. This is the one, for those of you that wondered why Harris Avenue is a divided road, this track ran up Harris Avenue right down the middle. And when they pulled the track, they just turfed it over and left the green space in the middle. Nevertheless, as the Boston Record predicted, after 1900, Needham and the surrounding towns began to develop as among the most attractive of Boston's outer suburbs. While the train provided an alternative living destination for wealthy Bostonians, the streetcar opened up the whole area between the rail lines to easy and efficient travel for everyone. Just like with the trains, local businessmen bought up sections of land, which they divided up into house lots for development. Ads for these lots touted the clean air and water, Edison electricity, and especially the streetcars. Look at this, convenient to Boston, car lines to all points. And Robert Storr, 5 minutes walk from electric cars connecting with Boston elevated Forest Hills. So the streetcar became a selling point for the growing real estate market in Needham. The Needham Board of Trade, which had previously concerned itself with more storefront issues, also got into the act. Again, the clean air and water, and again, the excellent trains. But now there's more. Needham welcomes you and the babies. Excellent schools. Buy now, watch values grow. Live in Needham to live long. No longer farmland, no longer a refuge for your huddled masses of Boston bankers, Needham was now a place for modern growing families to set up stakes and stay. And they could feel safe here. Along with the assurances that the air and water were clean were assurances that you and the babies would live among your own Yankee kind. Along with the residential development in many growing suburban communities came redlining that drew certain segments of the population towards specific parts of town and away from others. And this is an issue that we've been discussing recently. It was at the time perfectly legal. And as you can see from the, I put dots next to them for the real estate ads, nobody had any qualms about announcing it. For the trolleys, broad service for little cost eventually proved unsustainable, and the trolleys began to lose money. They tried to boost ridership by promoting pleasure destinations, day trips, scenic routes, amusement parks, beaches. Norumbega Park and Revere Beach were both trolley parks, built at the end of the line to encourage riders to take the streetcar. Soon, however, the companies were unable to meet their costs and the lines began to fail, replaced by a more efficient, if less enjoyable, motor bus service. Trolley service in Needham lasted just under 30 years. 2 of the lines were closed by 1920, and the last line to Upper Falls closed in 1927. Nevertheless, by then the transformation had happened. In 1900, when the trolleys opened, the town population was 4,000 people. By 1910, it had grown 25% to 5,000. By 1930, when the trolleys closed, it had nearly tripled to 11,000. The last great transportation watershed was the circumferential highway, Route 128. How much do you hate this highway? How often do you try to avoid it? And how much less would your real estate be worth without it? Transportation in the Boston area had long been plagued by the ancient hub and spoke system that forced all traffic into the heart of the city. Starting in the 1930s, the state designated a circumferential highway around the city, created mostly by cobbling together a chain of existing local roads. In Needham, the circumferential highway was Greendale Avenue and Reservoir Street. Significant efforts to improve this route, however, had to wait until after the war, a benefit of the post-war prosperity and President Eisenhower's plan to create a modern American highway system. In 1948, Massachusetts Governor Robert Bradford and Transportation Secretary William Callahan published a master plan of proposed highways, which included true circumferential highways, routes 128 and 495. Route 128 ran in a semicircle around Boston from Peabody to Canton, crossing 27 municipalities. It became America's technology highway by opening up the land-rich suburbs to the new industrial and technological businesses, increasing development and mobility, and broadening the innovative influence of Boston's research universities. Developers, especially Cabot and Forbes, used the highway master plan to identify sites for likely development. In Needham, the land stripped for the Back Bay fill was prime, barren and unwanted by almost no one but them. Their development of the Needham Industrial Center was built on this stripped land, right alongside the new road. It was the first such business industrial center in the country. And to give you an idea, this line along the edge is part of the old gravel beds. This is what the land looked like after the gravel was excavated. It really was basically a sand pit. While the coaches and railroads benefited local businesses, the highway brought companies to Needham that had international importance. Companies like Upjohn, Kraft, Union Carbide, Firestone, and Coca-Cola. Employees came from across the country or from other countries to work at these companies. The new influx of population was more diverse and cosmopolitan than the immigrants who had come before. They were better educated, had traveled, and had been in the war. They were also more affluent, coming to this area for good quality jobs with multinational companies, and finding that Needham had plenty of space, and it was a congenial place to live and raise their children. Better still, there was easy access to their jobs and the city whenever and wherever else Route 128 could take them. It wasn't all just newcomers, though. At the same time, America was experiencing the baby boom, the rapid rise in population that resulted from post-war marriages and post-war prosperity. Even if you did not work for Upjohn or Firestone, the economy was booming. Housing rose to meet the need. Open land, used before the war for farming or just left open, became a valuable building asset. When we talk now about teardowns and real estate demand, one key point is that there is so little buildable land left in Needham. Well, this is when it filled up. In 1940, at the start of the war, Needham's population was 12,500. By 1960, 20 years later, it had doubled to 26,000. This picture is wonderful in so many ways. This is Exit 19, soon to be renamed something else. This is the Industrial Center, Kendrick Street, so Coke is right here. This little hill is where the Sheraton will someday be, and that gives you an idea of how much excavation there was, because this was the old ground level. So the highway, Muzzy Ford was there already. And the older neighborhood in the Heights, you could see the houses sort of built up around the streets in a, more or less random, semi-irregular pattern. And these are the new developments: Hunting Road, Fay Lane, there's a nest of little streets in there, Woodbine Circle, Hazel. This is Evelyn and the loop of Harvard. So you could see these empty areas are now being filled up with these sort of rapid fire, one after another, very similar, very quickly built houses to meet this boom in population that's happening after the war. Another key point is that the demand continues. Our population didn't stagnate at 30,000, it maxed out. Needham's real estate market is strong, and it remains strong even during downturns because demand exceeds supply. And this is an example. This is the house next door to mine. Last year at this time, it was a 1,700 square foot Cape, assessed at about $650,000. It was torn down over the summer, and a 5,200 square foot house was built that sold for $2 million. Small to big is really the only source of growth that's left. So what makes Needham real estate so consistently desirable? The good schools, but the schools are funded by the real estate taxes, so that's sort of chicken and egg. The transportation systems that we love to hate are what made our town what it is and what keeps it strong. Easy access to the Green Line, 16 trains a day, a highway that takes us anywhere. Needham still welcomes you and the babies, so keep your eye on us. Thank you. Now I'm going to open up the window and welcome any of your questions or comments.
Gloria, this is Kristen. I have a question.
Yeah.
It looks like the trolley tracks for the 4 trolleys that you showed us pictures of are all just single tracks. Did that mean that there was a trolley that went all the way down the end, turned around and came all the way back?
I think they turned at the hubs. So you go from Needham Center to Wellesley, and then that train would come back. Yeah. But you change trains to get onto another train. If you know that schedule that I put up actually tells you where to change. If you're going to this place, you change here, that kind of.
No, I just
So,
heard,
so it's a hopscotch. You just went from, one to the next to the next. Somebody just had a question?
yeah, I was just going to mention, yeah, on the operations, and I'm sort of into antique streetcars, but the 1916 Public Utilities report for Boston,
Mhm.
showed there were a lot of passing sightings on the road, so that they would be doing that on a timetable basis, though. You'd be expecting, the 505 is going to take the
Yeah.
siding here, and the 506 going the other way is going to go by it. And that whole thing was done by paper timetables, and conductors were expected to to follow it quite assiduously, believe me.
There's the whole history of the development of timekeeping and the railroad, why people carry watches.
Yep.
And the railroads, because before then, people didn't have to keep precise time.
Mhm.
So there were sightings as well?
Yes, right. The
Okay.
car lines, they would have the odd passing sighting. It's probably not more than 5% of the trackage, but yeah, it was enough so you could kind of run a half hourly or hourly service, which was great for the day. Again, traveling 20 miles an hour every half hour. Woo.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I didn't know that.
Was there ever a trolley down the middle of Fair Oaks?
No. Fair Oaks was a specific, it was developed as Fair Oaks Park. It was part of this Great Plain residential development. And the alley down the middle with the green space was just done to make it beautiful.
Okay.
And there's a couple of, there's another one up in Wilshire Park, I think does Wilshire Park have a median as well?
No.
But Harris Avenue does, and I
Yeah.
assume that
Yeah,
that.
but Harris is the old trolley line.
No.
That's where the track ran.
About Newbury Park.
Newbury Park.
Yeah, they do.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, some of those were done just as basically a neighborhood amenity.
Mm.
And that may be why they decided to turf the trolley line on Harris rather than pave it over and make the lanes a little wider.
And Colton Pack as well.
Okay,
And Fair Oaks Pack was originally on called Appleton Pack.
Yeah.
And if you looked at that picture you showed of the combination of the connect right at Chapel Street, Chestnut Street,
yeah.
Great Plain,
Mhm.
there was an Appleton company there, and that
Yeah,
was
he
probably
was a real estate investor,
yes, and that
real
was
estate agent, yeah.
that's who named it Appleton Pack. But
Yeah.
it was changed later to Fair Oaks. I don't know why, but it's probably named after the Civil War battle.
Could be, but yeah, I mean, to this day, developers name streets after their wives, daughters, mistresses.
Or I missed the beginning, but I obviously have taken the train into Boston on this route. Did the train originally start going up essentially Highland Avenue and Needham Street into Boston?
The train?
Yes.
The train went from our point of view, went from Center Station over, do you remember that bridge that was taken down over 128, like a couple years ago?
Yeah.
There's an old train bridge. Over that bridge behind Needham Street to essentially what's now the D line
Mhm.
and into
All right.
Boston that way. And in 1907, it was reoriented to go through West Roxbury
Yeah.
Junction,
You had that-
extended to Junction. But the Woonsocket line itself actually continued out to, Dover, what's now the rail trail.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just sort
So
of kept going.
It's a
And
beautiful
then-
picture
and
you
then,
had there of
Actually, ultimately reached Woonsocket.
yeah, the New York, the photo you had of the New York and New England
Yeah.
locomotive with some B&A cars behind it. That was that Millis, what became the Millis secondary,
Mm.
that the piece of what is now the Green Line, plus as you said, the bridge over 128,
Yeah.
right through town. The thing that's new is actually the New Haven connection going into Boston. Yeah, the original rail line, there was a rail connection. At one point, you could take a train from Needham to New York without,
Yeah.
without
And it-
changing trains.
And it also changed, I mean, one of the reasons you have like a B&M locomotive and or New Haven locomotive and a B&M car, they changed hands constantly.
Yeah.
And they just kept the rolling stock. And so you'll see trains cobbled together with, 3 or 4 different companies on the insignias, but they would just sell them off. It was a very, a volatile time in the railroad business as they were getting consolidated and settled and built out and all that stuff.
In more recent history, so we moved here in '93 and I've taken the train, but my understanding is when they took down the elevated orange line through Forest Hills, that there was a cessation of the train from Needham for, I don't know, several years, and that there was some doubt really they were going to bring it back. And, Henry Hersey, I guess, the station named after him, but think of how different this would be and how less desirable Needham would be without that commuter rail.
Yeah, and we moved here in '91, and one of the big advantages was the station. But there were several years where there was no.
No, there was a bus, but there was a bus line. The buses went.
The buses went,
Buses replaced the train. for
and they do
years.
still sort of. Well, actually, there was another bus too, right?
There was a bus that went to Watertown, but there was also one that went all the way into Copley Square. There was an
Yeah.
express.
Yeah,
I
and
know
that
it
one's
put in
been
quotes, but
because the 59 still goes to Watertown Square.
correct, but that's
Yeah.
been there for years and years and
Yeah.
years. But there was another bus that would take you all the way into Copley Square.
Yeah, because I remember there was another bus, and then that one I think ended shortly after we moved here.
Yes, and then they replaced the train line, and that's when they replaced the spur, the ties on the train line with concrete. I don't know if you all remember that. And they put concrete ties in, and they ran a couple of trains, and oh my goodness
Yep.
gracious, what happened? The concrete broke up. So they had to rip everything back up and put in the wooden ties, which give. So, it was an interesting couple of years here, trust me.
Embarrassing.
So now why do we drive? Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I have to say, I mean,
Spring Street bus.
I'm sorry.
Gloria,
Yes,
there was a Spring Street bus that went from Needham Center to Forest Hills.
right. Well, no, it didn't go to Forest Hills. You had to change to Spring Street.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, or it went to Dedham Circle. That's where it went. Because I grew up in Needham, and my parents were from Dedham originally. They lived in Needham, of course. But when my mother would go over to her mother's house, my grandmother's, to do the laundry, I was in kindergarten. Can you imagine? I was in kindergarten, and they would tell me to leave the Stephen Palmer School and take the bus to Dedham Circle to
Oh,
meet.
wow.
And I said to her years ago, "What did you let me do that for?" "Oh, it was a different time." Okay.
Sure was.
I think it was 10 cents to take the bus. It was right by right on Chestnut Street, right in front of Town Hall. Needham Transit, I think it was called, or Dedham Transit. Dedham Transit.
Oh. I never took it. My mother took it. I was in school. We came in 1950.
The garden shop.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of, people didn't have 5 cars in their driveways. There were a lot more public transport opportunities. But I have to say, when we moved here, the train was a big attraction. We were a block from Heights Station, and I would go into Cambridge. But it involved, the train all the way, because that system is still hub and spoke, all the way into Boston, and then on the red line back out to Cambridge. And one day I added it up and I realized I was spending 4 hours of my day commuting for, a 25-mile round trip.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought myself a parking pass and I started driving. And then I think that's the problem, is you want to encourage people to take public transportation. But as the systems retrench and become less convenient, people are less willing to do it. Now they're rethinking the train schedule, at least, for the time being. So, that may make it even less convenient.
It's interesting how many of the near suburbs like Needham, have had new shared use paths, bike paths in recent years, but it doesn't seem like there's any plans to actually connect Needham or the suburbs in Needham's direction to shared use paths at this point, which is another form of transportation for people who
Yeah.
don't want to drive.
Well, it's interesting, part of it is that the roads are already challenged enough. I mean, you look at, they're going to reconstruct and widen Needham Street, and you're thinking, where's the extra space going to come? There's no, there's a minuscule sidewalk and there's no walking, hardly any walking capacity on the street as it is. Where are they going to find the space? And then you have to find additional space for bikes. But I've been driving, since last March. I've been driving my daughter into work in Brookline along Beacon Street, and starting in the spring and until almost Christmas, they just took out a row of parking and turned it into a dedicated bike and bus lane. So traffic, the car traffic had a single lane, bikes and buses had another lane, and then the parking was inside that. And in some places, they took out the parking altogether to widen the road. So, and they were well used. So, at least when the weather is nice and the facilities were there, people who did not want the option of getting onto public transportation, during the pandemic, were using the bike lanes. And, so it's an opportunity to sort of rethink how roads like that are used.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the commuter rail. It's interesting that it was shut down for a long period of time. When would that be, in the 1970s? And then, of course, it came back.
80s?
Right.
It was in the early
Came
80s.
back
We
in
moved-
87. So-
Yeah, well, we moved here in 82 and it had closed. It closed soon after that. So
Yeah.
from the early 80s into the early 90s.
And one of the interesting things, and somebody mentioned this earlier, I think, was the fact that there's a corridor behind Northeastern that was, I guess, supposed to be part of the road system when it was shut down from when basically Boston said, we're not doing this road anymore. We're not doing roads that they're going to be disruptive to neighborhoods and all. So they shut off Route 3 and Route 95 and other ones from coming into Boston. And that corridor that goes through there, I believe, was supposed to be, it was part of the original road that was supposed to come in from 95.
That is correct. That was in the 1970s. And the then governor, whose name escapes me right now. Sargent, you're right. He said, no way, we're not going to bring the road in. But what you're thinking of is that's what today is Amtrak's Northeast Corridor. That's the main railroad line between Boston and New York.
Yeah.
And then the orange line was the elevated line in those days. So they took the elevated line down and put it along that corridor right there. And in the process of doing that, it was necessary to shut the Needham commuter line off because you couldn't run trains. They had it all torn up. And there was a big discussion, you're right, that Henry Hersey was involved in that. I think, wasn't he a representative to the legislature at that time? I can't remember. But at that point, he was concerned because there was a big movement that Needham was not going to have the rail line come back ever.
Right. I remember that.
But they did bring it back. And
so is that the corridor that Ruggles Station is on now?
Yes, that's correct. Ruggles Station did not exist in those days. The last station was, I think, Rosendale or Highlands or maybe Rosendale. You went through Forest Hills and joined the main line to Providence at that point. And then you went down, you went right behind Northeastern University into Back Bay Station.
So where was the train before they put that corridor in?
Right there, same place.
Oh, same place. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
The line from Needham Junction came up through West Roxbury, Highland, Rosendale, and there was one other town there, I think.
Bellevue.
Yeah, that's correct. And then it merged, it curved to the left and merged right at Forest Hills with the main line between Boston and Providence.
Gotcha. That's interesting. Thank you.
And it moved a little bit because that Southwest Corridor Park in Boston was where the extension of 95 was supposed to go through the city.
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
And it never did. And that's probably a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good thing.
Well, it didn't, but they did take some of the houses by eminent domain. I actually worked with somebody whose family home was taken for that route
Yeah.
before it was actually shut down. So
Yeah.
people did lose their homes, whether
Unfortunately,
it
that
was built
happened
or
a
not.
lot.
They did it. Melniacast Boulevard homes were taken is what was supposed to, what was it called? Like the circumferential, there was supposed to be an inner belt. Basically, it was supposed to go around, loop from there along to Somerville, basically.
That was $6.95. Yes.
Right.
We don't talk about it in polite company.
Gloria, was there ever an airstrip in Needham? Speaking of different forms of transportation.
No,
Officially, no, though the big field it's now the sort of where the Olin College playing soccer field is, down down the hill slope leading toward McIntosh Avenue in that area, was used. Amelia Earhart used to land her planes there because she used to visit. She was a friend of the Babsons, and she used to visit them.
Oh.
She dropped her planes in that field. And in the 50s, Leslie Cutler, who was our senator at the time, our state senator, was very much into civil aviation. And after the war, she thought that that would make an ideal civil airport. And actually pursued that idea for a while. Then obviously it never happened. And as air transportation grew, it became less and less feasible to run a small airstrip like that. But yeah, no, we never actually had one, but we came close.
Thank you very much for this, because it kind of popped up late in the day with the weekly newspaper.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're not, say if you're not on our mailing list, we send out a weekly email that every Thursday morning. It has a story. It has whatever news and announcements we have. Go to our website, needhamhistory.org, and there's a link at the top that says join our mailing list, and you can sign yourself up.
We do send stuff out to all the papers, the
Yeah.
Needham Times, the Patch, the Hometown Weekly, but we can't control how and when they actually use it. The
I
Patch,
understand
I think,
that.
does a particularly good job. So if you go follow them, you will see our stuff. So
I've been loving the articles that have appeared in the Times.
Thank you.
No,
Oh,
they've
absolutely.
really been great.
I have to say they're a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Even picking a topic for the week is a lot of fun.
I bet. Yeah, well, you're doing very well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it was nice to see the one by your archivist,
Polly, yes.
Polly Patrick.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've got a couple more by her too that I'm holding on to.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so we'll use those as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for last Sunday too. You've had a busy week.
I have had a busy week. I'm going to take a little day off tomorrow, I think.
Good, good. You deserve it.
Thank you, Gloria. Very
Thank you,
interesting.
Gloria.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We love doing these programs. We do as many of them as we can. We don't charge admission for them because we'd like as many people as possible to join us. We'd be very grateful if you joined. The address is needhamhistory.org/membership. And also we have other events coming up on our calendar. We keep our calendar updated. So if you're interested in what we have coming, the link is needhamhistory.org/calendar-events.